Hello, welcome back. If you are new here, my name is Douglas Johnson. I'm a certified yoga teacher, ordained minister, kirtan artist, human being, amongst other things. So if you are new here, welcome. That's who I am. If you're coming back, welcome back. And today I wanted to discuss a little bit or share or just kind of banter about meaning and giving things positive or negative meaning. Before I do that, though, I do want to thank those who make this work possible and help support this work. So I'm not really interested in running a business. That might be what you think I'm doing here, but it really isn't. I am just interested in sharing my observations, experiences, because people, at least in person, have told me how valuable they've been. I don't know that I've had the same impact online, but because of the pandemic, I ended up sharing online, and I just continue to do so. And I like doing it in an open way. So it's up to you to decide if you're getting enough value to want to support this work. But it's the people who feel that way that really make this possible. I don't have a lot of resources and time. These videos might seem very humble, but they still take time and energy and resources. And so it's really my patrons on Patreon that make these talks possible. They contribute monthly, some of them a lot, some of them very little, but it all adds up and it makes it so that I can do this as part of my job, if you will. I can take time aside and count on there being enough income so that I don't have to do other work during the time that I'm making these videos and editing and sharing them. So I want to thank them. Also, some of you contribute on a less frequent basis, just kind of maybe if a certain video strikes you and you go ahead and send something via Venmo or PayPal, and I appreciate that as well. Also very, very helpful. And then finally, some of you might not feel called to make a financial contribution, but you like, you subscribe, you share, you comment. All of those things help to spread the word. It shows that there's some value here for you and that others might get value, and YouTube tends to put that into their whole algorithm and all of that. So anyway, I want to thank those of you that are taking the time, energy, or money to do those things. So today I wanted to share a little bit about meaning, decision. Not even really sure what I want to title this video, but it's just something that I wanted to speak a little bit about because it's something I've been playing around with in my own work and life. So what scriptures like the Tao and A Course in Miracles tell us is that really we give meaning to things and we decide the meaning of things. And they both have a different slant on this, but basically this is what they're saying, is that in a very real sense, what's out there is neutral. It really doesn't have any kind of absolute positive or negative spin. If you really want to give everything a value, then it's good. It's all good. Even the bad is good ultimately. It's all part of a good thing. God is good and everything that God creates is good. So we can take that very broad view. I know that's a hard pill for many people to swallow, and I'm not telling you that you need to believe that to listen to this talk, but this would be when we look at, like, again, teaching it from A Course in Miracles or something like that. It really is saying that everything is an extension of God's love. So how could it be anything other than good? Okay? That's not the point of today's talks. I'm not interested in getting into the weeds on that. It's very easy to take any of these concepts and drill down and spend hours trying to explain the philosophy. So each one of these deserves kind of a video of its own, but that's sort of the ultimate view. But once we take a perspective, like my own personal perspective, then it seems like certain things have a good quality and certain of them have a bad quality. For instance, if I have my heart broken, if I'm in love with somebody and they don't reciprocate that love and they leave or they treat me poorly, then it is very tempting from a personal perspective to decide, well, that's bad. And that shouldn't be happening, or I wish that wasn't happening, or it's bad that this is happening. So I understand that. I've done it myself, believe me. It's very tempting, it's very easy. But what scriptures like A Course in Miracles are inviting us to do, and teachers like Byron Katie are inviting us to do, is to question that narrative, to question that belief that we just assume there's no other way of looking at it. Well, Byron Katie's work is really great for examining what we just assume there's no other way of looking at it. If you haven't checked that out, I do recommend you do that. She has a great form of inquiry, which is a type of spiritual questioning. There's many kinds of inquiry, but she has one that is quite powerful. And she has all the resources out there for free, so you can just learn to do this type of inquiry on your own. I think she also has a hotline that you can call and work with others. So that's a resource for you to explore. But my point and what I'm playing around with is the meaning and the value that we give to certain experiences. So what if there, again, is no good or bad? Or you could say everything ultimately is good, but it seems to us like there are good things and bad things. But ultimately, there really isn't good and bad. There's really only just one. We can call it the good or whatever, but there's just one thing happening, and it's good. But from our perspective, it seems like there's good and bad, right and wrong. And again, it's not just A Course in Miracles. The Tao also says that when you create the good, you're also creating the bad. So what if we either drop this idea of good and bad, of believing the thoughts that our mind generates, because our mind will generally generate these thoughts, and it's up to us to sort of catch them and question them. So what if we just drop the idea of good and bad altogether? Or what if we decide that the bad things that are happening to us could actually be good things? Now, the foundations for my spiritual journey go way, 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 way back. I didn't even realize those were foundations when they're happening, but one of the things that introduced me to the concept of manifestation and that there's something else happening here was my father introduced me to the concepts of Think and Grow Rich at a relatively young age. And I don't subscribe fully to that philosophy. I don't follow it fully, but one of the things he points out in there is the power of decision. And I believe it's from A Course in Miracles, if not another, or sorry, Think and Grow Rich, if not another similar text, where they talk about how successful people will make a decision. I remember this very, very vividly, because it really struck me. Successful people will decide that setbacks are actually to their advantage. So isn't this an interesting concept? And they're talking about successful people. So we're assuming we're talking about people who have actually achieved success. And then we're asking them, well, what do you do to achieve a success? And one of the things they report is when something quote unquote bad happens, when something goes wrong, I decide. And that's one of the major things I'd like you to take from this talk is the power of decision. I decide it's going to be to my advantage. So again, this is interesting, having just come out of this dark night of the soul, where there were a lot of thoughts and ideas in my head that things were bad, things were not going well in my life, things were not right. And it did feel like I was powerless to decide otherwise. So I understand if it feels that way to you, because I have been in that boat. But ultimately, spirituality is about our power to perceive things differently than we currently are, our ability to shift our perspective. And it does seem to me that one of the most powerful tools we have for doing that is beginning to use our thoughts, beginning to decide to see things differently. So in A Course in Miracles, in one of the passages, they talk about how you should wake up and decide how you want your day to go. So again, this plugs right in with manifestation, which is something I've been studying and interested in lately. So it says basically, decide how you want your day to go, and say to yourself that if you make no decisions by yourself, that is the day that will be given to you. Now, what do they mean by no decisions by yourself? Well, the Course is pretty clear. Remember those cartoons when there'd be like a devil on one shoulder and an angel on the other shoulder, and each of them would be trying to convince you? Well, the Course in Miracles lays out that this is very close to the reality that we live in, that we have a voice in our head that's very loud, speaks very quickly, and is essentially painting things in a very us or them, good, bad, right, wrong, good, evil way. And this is what the Course in Miracles and in spiritual teaching is called ego. So this is the voice for separation. This is the voice for fear. This is the voice for protecting yourself. Like Byron Katie says, defense is the first act of war. Defense is already putting up a barrier and saying that there's separation between you and I. And all spirituality, to a greater or lesser degree, is about seeing through this perceived separation. So we have a choice, we have a decision. Something happens. Again, let's just take the perspective that it is neutral. It has no meaning and it has no value. It isn't good or bad from a universal, ultimate perspective. It just is. Like Buddhism teaches, suchness, isness. It just is. It isn't personal. It isn't meant, as painful as it might be, it isn't meant as a personal affront. It isn't meant to spoil your day. It isn't meant to frustrate you or anger you. It just is. It's the way things are. What do you tell yourself about that? So what narrative do you create? What decisions do you make? What kind of value judgments do you put on that? So what the Course is telling us is we have this sort of devil and angel on our shoulders. Which one do we want to listen to? One of them will narrate a story about fear, death, separation, and it will say, this is terrible, this is awful, this shouldn't have happened. of course, the ego will also narrate about wins, right? Oh, you're winning, you're so attractive, oh, look, everyone loves you. But it's a very short back and forth oscillating thing if you listen to the ego. 1 minute you could be winning, and the next minute you're losing. There's no stability there. It's all based on feedback from the outside. What spirituality is encouraging us to do is not take feedback from outside. And this is true of manifestation as well. This is why manifestation can be so tricky, because we're generally looking outside of ourselves to see what is true and what's real. And the manifestation folks that I listen to say you need to stop doing that if you're going to change your reality. And that sounds to us a little bit like being delusional, doesn't it? But it's interesting how much overlap there is with spirituality, with like A Course in Miracles, where it's laying out very plainly, your ego will paint the picture that this world is full of sin, that it's a terrible place, that it's an awful place. So part of your practice, part of your job, if you will, if you're interested, again, you need to feel called to do this. I'm not interested in telling anybody what to do. And again, I'm just sharing this from my own experience. I'm not here preaching to you saying, oh, you need to do this to be a good person. I don't believe spirituality makes you a good person. I believe you're already a good person, irrespective of the life that you're living. Again, this is part of my spiritual work, is to try and see the world that way. So none of this is about, oh, you need to fix yourself, you need to get better. This is really about sharing the peace, joy, and bliss that I've experienced and sharing it with you in the hopes that you get value from it. So we have these two perspectives. Which one are you choosing? Which voice are you choosing to listen to? So as I said, the ego speaks very loud. It speaks quickly. And unless we learn to pause, which is something that we generally learn to do through spiritual practice, especially meditation, unless we learn to pause and listen to a still, quiet voice within us, that's the narrative that most of us are going to go with. That's what we would call the standard narrative, the obvious truth, right? The obvious truth. You got fired, that's obviously bad. But is it? This is, again, what we're being invited to look at. Somebody criticizes us or disapproves of us, that's bad. Or is it? Again, we can choose. That's the power we have as spiritual beings. We can decide what the meaning of something is. We can decide to give value to things or not. We can withhold that. And so these are very powerful things. And what I'm inviting you to do today is to investigate. How are you using those tools? What meaning are you giving to things? And like Byron Katie likes to point out, she still tells stories, but she tells happy stories. She says, I love my story about my dog, right? Which is, oh, he's a happy dog, he loves me, all this. Is it true? Do we ever know if our dog loves us? Do we ever know if anyone loves us? Even if someone says that they do we know? In my experience, there's nothing we can really truly know beyond a shadow of a doubt. If you ever study critical thinking in depth, philosophy, you realize that there really is no way to prove. I can't prove that I'm not in the matrix right now, that my brain hasn't been extracted from my body and put in some elaborate machine that is sending it all kinds of sense data that doesn't correspond with the world as it is, that I'm living in a simulation. There's no way for me to prove that, because any testing I do is part of the simulation, okay? So it's not that I want you to go around thinking you're living in a simulation, but what I'm encouraging you to do is soften your attachment to what you believe is the quote-unquote truth if it's making you suffer. And realize that you have the power to decide differently. You have the power to give it a different meaning. You have the power to give it a different value, meaning a positive instead of a negative spin. So again, if I get fired, instead of saying this is the worst thing that ever happened to me, this is not fair, I don't deserve this, or other standard narrative ideas, we could say, oh, this is going to be great. I didn't really like that job. Or even if we like the job, we could maybe say, well, wow, this is exciting. Maybe I'm going to find a job that I like so much more, or that I'm going to be better suited for, or that I'm going to find more fulfilling. So again, there's a few different aspects here. One is meaning. Okay, so what kind of meaning are we giving to something? Again, let's say I have my heart broken. I can give that the meaning, now I'm never going to find love, right? That is giving meaning to something that doesn't really have meaning. Just because one person that we fall in love with doesn't reciprocate that love, that does not mean we will never fall in love or never be loved, but our mind will generate thoughts like that. So meaning is one thing to really look at. What meaning are you giving to the events in your life? And it doesn't have to be a big event like that. It could be like moment by moment. In fact, this is something I recommend you practice moment by moment. Meaning, what meaning are you giving to things? Okay, value. So again, good, bad. Oh, I got fired. That's bad. That's obviously bad. It's so bad. Again, things are actually neutral. They aren't good or bad in the way that we think of them. So instead of saying this is bad, why not just say, oh, good. Now I've got extra time to clean up my house. I've been meaning to do that. So while I look for another job, I can clean up the house. I can clean up the basement. I've been meaning to do that. I've been meaning to clean out the attic. I've been meaning to volunteer at the shelter. So now I've got time. Find a way. Decide, because you have the power. Decide that you will make it a positive. Now I have time to take that vacation. Now I have time to rest. Now I have time to do yoga. Now I have time to do my spiritual practices. Decide. Decide it's going to be a positive. Okay, so you've got, again, the value, you've got the meaning there. And so these are things that you can practice, that you can do. Notice what kind of narrative, again, you're creating, and decide to create a different narrative. And I've personally found this to be very helpful, very powerful. And if there's any truth to what I've read about manifestation, these concepts actually lay the foundation and groundwork to manifest a more fulfilling, satisfying life for yourself. Because a lot of what manifests, if not everything that manifests for us, is based on our assumptions about ourselves and about the world that we live in. It's an interesting thought, and I'm not asking you to believe this thought, but it's interesting to play with, right? Maybe it's true, we don't know. But what if whatever I believe is what manifests as my reality? Then the feedback I get reinforces my beliefs. Now, I'm not talking about the fleeting thoughts you have that come and go. We have sort of a surface level of belief that doesn't seem to impact our moment by moment experience. Like right now, I could say, oh, I believe there's going to be a solar eclipse right now, and there isn't. Well, this isn't, I don't really believe that, and it isn't something that runs very deep. What manifests for us is the beliefs that we have deep in our heart. And so those are the things that, this is why you might believe something on a conscious level that contradicts what's actually manifesting. And this goes back to things I've talked about in the past that deal with things like repression, repressed emotions, repressed beliefs. Many of us have beliefs that come from childhood that, again, manifest in our experience, but are actually not, they're not true or false. Again, so the meaning, right? The meaning and the value, and then again, the third thing that I might add is this idea of true or false. That are we thinking that this thing is one way and that's the truth, that's the only way of seeing it? Can you soften that? Can you, again, Byron Katie's work is a great way to do that. You work with your beliefs, your assumptions, because it does seem like our experience is built on the assumptions we have about ourselves and others. All right, everyone. So I hope you found this valuable or helpful. Please reach out if you think that I can give you a hand. And these are things like most of the things that I teach. I'm a yoga teacher and I have many things that I could share and teach. And I do. In person, on retreats, I share things like breath work techniques, yoga postures, chanting, and other things. These are very powerful tools, but the reason that I don't spend that much time here sharing those with you is there's a million people that you can learn those things from. So what I'm trying to share are things that are somewhat a little more personal to me, things that I've experienced, or things from scriptures and things that I've read or experienced, or others I know have experienced, that are kind of on a more subtle level. And they're generally things that you can apply moment by moment. This is what interests me most. The breathing techniques, you can only do them while you have the right space and environment. You can't do that on a crowded bus. You can't do that at work. Same with meditation techniques, many other things. I really am interested in things that, in a sense, aren't techniques. These are things that you can apply to your mind and experience at any moment. So this is what I encourage you to do. And I would love to hear from you about your experience. Maybe play around with this a little bit and then come back, leave a comment. Again, I want to thank everyone who supports this work. Again, I'm not really interested in running a business. I really am just interested in sharing, and unfortunately that does require support. Or maybe it's not unfortunate, maybe it's fortunate. It gives you an opportunity to, without having to be charged or told that you need to pay a certain amount, decide what sort of value you're getting. Tithing and seva, giving without giving freely, right, is a very important spiritual concept. So hopefully these create an opportunity for you to do that. All right, everyone, thank you so much for listening. And until next time, namaste, and have a beautiful, beautiful day.